I want to go now to, I think, a couple of lessons, and you touched on some of this earlier, Chris, but about campaigns, and we seem to say it every time, but there never seems to be any really kind of organised arrangement for assessing costings and for debates. And time after time after time, campaigns are bogged down about discussions about those issues. Dennis, when the debate about the debate seemed to consume so much time in the last week, that couldn't have been helpful to the government's cause, because I thought they needed that time. They desperately needed that time.
Yes, they were always banking on having a good last week, and that meant they had to have a last week where their message was unpolluted and where they made every night a winner on the 6 o'clock news. And the debate about the debate cut into that time and denied them access to getting their message out.
I reckon the debate about the debate, coupled with the debate about the costings, is exactly what drove that incredibly high informal vote that we saw last night. It was up around 6%. Now, that is a national disgrace, and I think that is attributable...
That wasn't Mark Latham?
I think in part it was Mark Latham, you know. I do think that. But also, I think this debate about the debate and debate about the costings and all that reflects, in fact, a deeper problem, which was that the Labor Party and the Liberals, to a large extent too, did not have constructive, imaginative policies that would have crowded out a trivial debate. And when the journalists were complaining, oh, Mark Latham's dominating, and that's lots of acres of space. Oh, there's no real policies. Oh, you know, debate about debate. That's because they themselves are bored.
Well, I think that, I mean, people say it was a boring campaign. Well, I don't think it was boring at all.
Fascinating.
But,
yeah.
I mean, I think that when you have parties that spend so much time lopping and chopping areas of policy on which they differ, you end up with these two candidates who are kind of like opposition leaders, as was said during the campaign, running effectively on personality because the major areas of difference between them have been eliminated. Who can be surprised when the national result is one of total puzzlement? And I think that disaffection is evident in that high informal vote.
And look, I think there is, and I want to go back to this, because I think there's a small window of opportunity now before the independents and the Greens and everyone else split off and decide what they want to be bought off on, for them to get together and look at a package of parliamentary reform which would include debating, it would include question time, it would include a budgetary office that's attached to the Parliament as well. And if they could agree on a charter like that, first and foremost, before they decide on anything else, we could be in a small window of opportunity where our democracy is actually enhanced by this process.
Dennis?
Yeah, I agree with that. But also, just to pick up on Annabelle's point, I can't remember a campaign where both sides were so risk-averse. There was no boldness, no leadership shown really from either Tony Abbott or Julia Gillard. They stuck to their scripts, which were very narrow and very tightly controlled. You know, there was nothing about the future. There was no real vision. And usually we see some of that in a federal election campaign. There was almost none in this one.
I'm not so sure that's true, Dennis. I mean, one of them was promising a $43 billion broadband, and that had lots of ideological angles to it, like state ownership and private enterprise and all that kind of stuff.
But it wasn't sold that way.
Well, it may not have been, but this is a huge investment. I think it's a bad investment, but it's big. And then Tony Abbott was promising the most generous parental leave scheme, madly generous, I've ever seen. That too had ideology. These were big policies.
But to pick up on Dennis's point, though, Arthur Sinodinos said that he couldn't remember an election campaign where there hadn't been a speech on foreign policy made by the Prime Minister, that John Howard always demanded that. All of this was very inward-looking. And that was the thing I thought that was most disappointing about the campaign, at a time when we had 3 deaths in Afghanistan during the actual campaign period, that we didn't actually have a speech talking about Australia's commitment.
Well, what about neither did foreign policy matters come up at the forums, and let's talk about those forums. What did you make of them, and do you think, because this is probably the first time we saw forums done in this way in a campaign, do you think, Dennis, that they will become a more regular part of campaigns in the future?
Yeah, I think they will. They were very successful. The one in Queensland was quieter than the one in Western Sydney, and I'm not sure the Courier Mail had quite enough signage at it. But anyway,
Nuremberg with those posters coming down.
But yeah, I think they will become a feature, and I think that newspapers around the country are thinking about doing them all over the place next time. The interesting thing will be what happens next March with the New South Wales state election. I think they'll have to have some sort of barrier between the audience and the state government.
And just on that, you can't help but pick up a different approach from the politicians. They're more at the forums. They're friendlier. They're more forgiving. of real people than they are of the reptiles in the media. And just I'll give you a sense now of Julia Gillard and how she handled a forum as opposed to a question from a journalist.
You were Deputy Prime Minister when Kevin Rudd supposedly lost his way, and now you laud Kevin Rudd as a great achiever and expect the people of Australia to vote your party back in for another 3 years. Do you feel like a hypocrite? And what will you be doing differently if you are elected?
Well, thank you for the question, and I like it when people are up front. I think that's good.
By our calculations, you have, I think, $200 million left in the money earmarked in the budget for climate change. Are you going to spend that, or are you not talking about climate change so much after the Citizens' Assembly didn't go down so well?
Oh dear, cynicism.
See the point?
Well, I think these were really interesting events, these town hall things, and I thought the major broadcasters were very snobby in not wanting to put them to air because it cut out the journalists, and we all think that it should go through journalists.
Well, ABC wasn't allowed to put the first one.
No, the first one. No, but it could have had on a delayed telecast, and it didn't do that. And the thing is here, these are different because, one, the politician has to be more polite. They actually have to make a better fist of answering a question. And third, the questions themselves become interesting as a measure of where the public's at.
The questions got a bigger run than the answers
smart ass,
in the media.
This was a great development over the course of this campaign. And there's a lot about this campaign that is dispiriting and kind of depressing, but the great thing about it is that from a start where both candidates were criticised for being too much in a bubble, by the end of it, I think we had them clamouring to be ventilated in these public situations, and they were really, really good things to do.
Now, we're about to go to talking pictures, but here is one unresolved issue about who will be Foreign Minister in the next government. Have a look at this.
One of the bookies says you, Stephen Smith, are a 2-to-1 chance only of being Foreign Minister after the election, the third favourite after Kevin Rudd and Julie Bishop.
And the book is still open, and my advice would be to get on the part that says none of the above, and you'll get good odds. It's OK, time now for... we'll rejoin the panel very shortly, but here's Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.